The first time Ambassador Cale Voreth heard it, he froze in place. He had been standing in the long observation corridor of the Galactic Diplomatic Station Orion 7, reviewing trade documents on his data slate, when the sound reached him through the ventilation system. It was not an alarm. It was not a distress signal. It carried no recognizable pattern from any of the 462 registered species in the Galactic Union. It was sharp, then rolling, then sharp again, rhythmic but unpredictable, almost like breathing gone wrong, like something breaking apart from the inside. He dropped his data slate, got his assistant. A young Vethali named Suri rushed to his side. She found him pressed against the corridor wall, both of his secondary eye membranes fully extended, a biological response, his species reserved for moments of extreme threat detection. His primary hands were trembling. "Ambassador," Suri said carefully, "are you unwell?" "That sound," he whispered. "Where is it coming from?" Suri tilted her narrow head and listened. Then her expression shifted into something almost like confusion. "The human quarters, sir. It is called laughter. They do it often, particularly when they are together in groups." Cale Voreth said nothing for a long moment. He just stood there, listening to it travel through the walls, that irregular, explosive, deeply unsettling noise. It rose and fell without warning. It had no clean start and no clean end. It seemed almost contagious, multiplying as more voices joined, layering over each other like something alive and spreading. "Why," he finally said, "does no one warn incoming diplomats about this?" Suri opened her mouth, then closed it again. The honest answer was that most species didn't think to. Humans laughed so naturally, so constantly, that those who lived near them simply adjusted. But those who encountered it for the first time, really encountered it without context, had reactions that ranged from mild alarm to full biological threat response. Cale Voreth was not the first. He would not be the last. The Galactic Union had made first contact with humanity 112 years ago, and in that time, humans had become one of the most studied species in recorded interstellar history. Not because of their technology, which was impressive but not extraordinary. Not because of their biology, which was fragile by most standards. Not because of their military capability, though that was something the older civilizations quietly respected from a careful distance. Humans were studied because they were profoundly, fundamentally strange in ways that no amount of observation seemed to fully explain. The laughter was only one piece of it. Dr. Thessaly Marin, a xenanthropologist from the University of New Geneva, had spent 30 years stationed at various diplomatic outposts studying exactly this phenomenon. She had cataloged reactions from over 60 different species. She had filled 17 research volumes and was currently working on the 18th. Her work was considered essential reading for any diplomat, soldier, or trader who expected to work alongside human beings for extended periods. The core of her findings was simple, even if the implications were not. Alien species were afraid of human laughter because it violated every biological rule they understood about sound and survival. In the natural world, across virtually every planet that hosted complex life, sounds that were loud, sudden, and irregular meant danger. Predators used sound to disorient prey. Environmental disasters announced themselves with noise. A creature making unpredictable, rapid vocalizations was either under attack, issuing a warning, or experiencing catastrophic internal failure. Every living species in the Galactic Union had some version of this wired into its nervous system. Sound equaled information. Irregular sound equaled threat. And then there were humans, who made exactly that kind of sound when they were happy. This was not a small thing. It was not a quirk that could be easily set aside, because the body did not ask permission before it responded to threat signals. The Vithali's scent glands activated. The Karathi's armor plates locked into defensive position. The Kreen went entirely silent and still, pupils dilating to near black. These were involuntary responses, as automatic as breathing, and they happened every single time a human laughed loudly near a member of another species who hadn't had years of exposure. To condition themselves past the initial startle dot, it created a very specific, very uncomfortable social dynamic that diplomats spent enormous energy trying to navigate. Commander, Yal Doran had no idea any of this was happening. When she first arrived at Orion-7. She was 34 years old. Career military, sharp in the way that came from a decade of real decisions with real consequences. She had a dry sense of humor and a laugh that her crew described as a starting pistol wrapped in a fire. Alarm. She was also completely oblivious to the effect she had on the non-human staff of the station. Her first week passed without incident, mostly because she was in briefings, and her professional mode kept the laughter contained. The second week, she joined a joint exercise with a Karathi tactical unit, and during a planning session, one of her lieutenants made a joke about their navigation system that she found genuinely funny. She laughed, full and sudden and short and loud, and every single Karathi in the room had their armor plates standing at full extension before the sound finished echoing off the walls. No one said anything. The Karathi were too disciplined for that. But Yael noticed the posture shift, the sudden stillness, the very careful way they all oriented slightly away from her for the next 20 minutes. She assumed she had said something offensive. She spent 2 days quietly apologizing to her liaison officer for an insult she couldn't identify. Her liaison officer, a Karathi named Grethvassal, did not know how to explain that the offense had not been linguistic. He had been trained in human protocols. He understood, intellectually, that laughter was a positive signal. But understanding it intellectually and not reacting physically when it happened were two completely different problems. And the gap between them was the gap where misunderstandings lived and sometimes grew into something worse. It was Dr. Marin who finally sat Yael down and explained it. They were in the station's small, human-designated lounge, one of several areas specifically designed so that non-humans who found the sound difficult could avoid it without having to explain themselves. Marin had a cup of coffee and a patient expression that Yael would later describe as the face of someone about to deliver news they had delivered many, many times before. Your laugh isn't the problem, Marin said. The problem is that it sounds, to most non-human nervous systems, exactly like a predator making a kill sound. Yael stared at her. I know, Marin said. I'm not. I know you're not. But their bodies don't know that. The signal bypasses rational thought. It goes straight to the part of the brain that has been saying irregular explosive vocalization means run for a few 100 million years of evolution. No amount of briefing fully overrides that. You can tell a Karathi soldier that human laughter is friendly until you're both exhausted. The first time you actually do it in a quiet room, his plates are going up. Yael was quiet for a moment. Then she said, so every time I laugh, I'm accidentally telling everyone around me that something is being hunted. Marin considered this. More or less. Though it's slightly more complicated than that. How? Marin set down her coffee and leaned forward. The expression on her face had shifted from patient to something that Yael couldn't quite read, something between professional fascination and a kind of deep, careful unease. Because the other part, Marin said slowly, is that humans laugh hardest at things that hurt, at failure, at fear, at pain, at the very edge of disaster. And when other species realize that, when they really understand that you are making your loudest, most uncontrolled sounds in response to things that should, by every biological rule. Cause distress. That's when it stops being just a startled response. She paused. That's when it starts being something else entirely. Yell waited outside the lounge. Somewhere down the corridor, a group of human technicians burst into laughter over something. The sound rolled through the walls, warm and ragged and completely unself-conscious. Marin watched Yao's face as she listened to it, and then she watched the door, as though she could see through it to whatever non-human staff member was currently pressing themselves against the opposite wall and trying to remember that it was fine. It was just humans. It always meant nothing was wrong. It starts, Marin said quietly, being terrifying for an entirely different reason. Dr. Thessaly Marin had a file on her personal terminal that she had never submitted for official publication. It was not because the research was flawed. The research was the most rigorous work she had ever done. Every data point was sourced, cross-referenced, and verified across multiple independent studies spanning 3 decades. She had interviews from 47 non-human diplomatic staff, 32 military liaison officers, and 11 xenopsychologists from 7 different species. The methodology was clean. The conclusions were clear. She hadn't published it because she wasn't sure what would happen if the wrong people, or the wrong species, read it. The file was titled, in her own shorthand, The Laugh at the Abyss. The foundational discovery had come from a Korean psychologist named Velshan Tui, who had been embedded with a human naval unit during a joint patrol mission in the outer systems. About 20 years before Marin arrived at Orion 7, Velshan Tui had been the first non-human researcher to systematically document human laughter in high-stress environments, and what she had found had quietly unsettled the Korean scientific community for 2 decades. Humans laughed more under pressure, not less. This was not a performance. It was not a coping mechanism in the conscious sense, not something humans chose to do because they had decided it helped. It was biological. When cortisol spiked, when adrenaline flooded the system, when the body pushed itself to the edge of what it could physically manage, human vocal cords loosened. Human facial muscles pulled back. The sound came out in virtually every other complex species in the Galactic Union. Extreme stress produced silence or distress vocalizations. The Korathi went silent. The Vethali produced a low, subsonic hum that signaled group cohesion. The Kreen made a clicking sound that was the biological equivalent of bracing for impact. Even the Solvari, who were considered one of the most emotionally expressive species in the Union, became quiet and still when genuine danger arrived. Humans did the opposite. Velshan Tui's notes from one particular mission had been reproduced in Marin's file almost in full. The human unit had been responding to a distress signal that turned out to be a trap. They had come out of their jump into the middle of a hostile formation, massively outgunned, with 3 minutes to respond before their shields failed. Velshan Tui had been in the bridge crew, and she had documented, with the careful precision of a scientist watching something she genuinely could not explain, what happened. The humans did not go quiet. They did not freeze. The commanding officer, a woman named Captain Reyes, had assessed the situation in approximately 4 seconds, and then said, loudly, and with what Velshan Tui described, extraordinary calm, something that translated roughly as, well, that's a lot of them, isn't it? And several of her crew had laughed, not hysterically. Not the laughter of people losing their grip. Velshan Tui had been careful to note this, because she initially assumed she was witnessing psychological breakdown. But the crew's hands were steady. Their eyes were focused. They were already moving to their stations, already running calculations, already doing the exact work that needed to be done. The laughter lasted perhaps 3 seconds, and then they were simply working. Efficient and precise, and Captain Reyes was giving orders in a clear, measured voice, as though she had been planning for this specific scenario her entire career. They survived the engagement. They improvised a solution that Vel-Shan Tui described as not physically probable by any standard tactical model. Afterward, she had asked Captain Reyes about the laughter. She had genuinely wanted to understand. She expected a complex answer about human psychology or cultural custom or trained response. Reyes had looked at her for a moment and then said, "If you don't laugh, you think about how scared you are. If you think about how scared you are, you stop thinking about the problem." Vel-Shan Tui had written in her notes, "This species has evolved a mechanism to chemically suppress fear, response through voluntary sound production. I do not believe they are fully aware that this is what they are doing." Marin had built on that observation for years. What she had found, and what she had never published, was that the mechanism went deeper than even Vel-Shan Tui had realized. Human laughter wasn't just a fear suppressor. It was, in a very specific neurological sense, a defiance response. When the human brain processed a threat and judged it survivable, or even when it judged the threat as potentially unsurvivable, but decided to act anyway, it produced laughter as a kind of signal. Not to the threat, to itself, to the group. The signal meant, "I see this. I am not broken by it." We continue. This was, by the standards of most advanced civilizations, deeply irrational behavior. And that irrationality was precisely what made it so unnerving to observe. Commander Yael Doran had come back to Marin's office 4 times in the week after their first conversation. Each time she arrived with more questions and a slightly more complicated expression. On the 4th visit, she brought coffee, real coffee, not the synthesized version the station dispensed, which Marin took as a sign that the conversation was going somewhere significant. "You said last time that it becomes terrifying for a different reason," Yael said, settling into the chair across from Marin's desk. "You never finished explaining that." Marin had been waiting for her to come back to it. She turned her chair slightly and looked at the wall where she kept a printed map of the Union's outer territories, a habit, something to focus on when she needed to organize her thoughts carefully. "Most species in the Union fear what they don't understand," she said. "That's universal. But fear of the unknown has a natural ceiling. Once you learn enough about something, the fear fades. It becomes familiar, manageable. Even if the thing itself is still dangerous, you stop being afraid of it in that deep, instinctive way." Yael nodded. "Human laughter doesn't follow that pattern," Marin continued. "The more other species learn about it, the more they understand what it actually is, the more afraid they get. Not less, more." She paused to let that land. "Because when you don't know what laughter is, it's just a strange sound. An involuntary startle response, an evolutionary quirk, something to file under. Humans are unusual. But when you do understand it, when you understand that humans make their most uncontrolled sounds at the exact moment, when they are staring directly at something that could destroy them, and they are choosing to make that sound anyway, that's when the fear changes character." Yael was very still. "It stops being fear of a strange noise," Marin said. "It becomes fear of what the noise means, what it implies about the creature making it." She finally turned away from the map and looked directly at Yael. "Every other species in this Union, when they reach the edge of what they can handle, goes quiet. They go inward. They find the stillness that lets them function. But humans, when humans reach that edge, they open their mouths and they make noise. Loud, uncontrolled, irregular noise. And they keep functioning. They keep thinking. They keep fighting." She leaned back in her chair. "And after 60 years of studying you, the question that keeps every Zenith psychologist in this Union up at night is not, why do humans laugh when they're afraid? The question is, where is the edge?" Yael frowned. "What do you mean?" Every species has a threshold, Marin said, a point at which the system breaks down. Fear becomes overwhelming. The body stops, shuts down, surrenders. Every species has this. It's biological law. You cannot sustain a threat response indefinitely without catastrophic failure. A Korathi can withstand extreme physical damage, but sustained psychological pressure degrades them within 72 hours. The Kreen can endure enormous cognitive load, but emotional overload produces a complete shutdown. Every species has the edge. She looked at Yael very steadily. We have 60 years of data on humans. We have mission logs, psychological assessments, medical records, combat reports. We have documented humans surviving things that should have produced complete psychological collapse. We have documented human crews laughing in situations that would have catatonic locked any Vethali unit in the same scenario. A long silence settled in the room. And we still don't know, Marin said quietly, where your edge is. We don't know if there is one. And that specific uncertainty is what makes the laughter terrifying to every civilization that has ever studied you closely enough to ask the question. Outside the window, the stars were cold and still. Somewhere in the station, a group of human engineers had just finished a double shift. Their laughter was distant but clear, rolling easily through the walls without apology. Warm and ragged and utterly without fear. Yael listened to it for a moment, hearing it differently now. And what do you think? She asked. You've studied us longer than anyone. Do you think there's an edge? Marin was quiet for a very long time. Then she picked up her coffee, looked at it, and said nothing. Because the honest answer, the one she had never written in any of her 17 published volumes, was that she had stopped being afraid of the question. That was what frightened her most of all. The Galactic Union's High Council did not panic easily. In 400 years of operation, it had navigated species extinctions, resource wars, 3 separate first contact disasters, and 1 incident involving a Vethili ambassador and a malfunctioning gravity generator that no one was permitted to discuss in official records. The Council had seen a great many things, and its collective institutional response to almost all of them was a measured, careful, bureaucratic calm that the member species had come to find deeply reassuring. So when a formal emergency session was called, with only 6 hours' notice, with no published agenda, no preliminary briefing documents, and a security classification that locked out every non-permanent member observer, people noticed. Ambassador Kaelvorth arrived to find the chamber already half full and completely silent, which was unusual. The Korathi delegation was present in full military complement. The Kreen had sent their senior intelligence analyst instead of their standard diplomatic representative, which Kaelvorth noted with the quiet unease of someone who had spent 40 years reading rooms. Even the Solvari, who were notoriously difficult to alarm, and who approached most interstellar crises with the serene detachment of a species that had already survived 2 near-extinction events, were present in numbers that exceeded their standard diplomatic footprint by a factor of 3. Kaelvorth took his seat and said nothing. He was very good at saying nothing when it mattered. The session was called to order by Council Chair Tevan Mahal, a Vethali elder whose age was a politely avoided topic and whose political instincts were considered second to none. She did not begin with the standard procedural review. She placed a single document on the table in front of her and looked at the chamber. This session concerns a situation that has developed over the past 14 months in the Outer Territories, she said. Specifically, it concerns the Joint Human-Kreen Research Installation at Meridian Station, and a series of events that began approximately 11 months ago during a routine deep field survey mission. She paused. I want to make clear before we proceed that the human diplomatic delegation has not been briefed on the content of this session. The Council has made that choice deliberately, and we will address the ethical dimensions of that decision before we conclude. For now, I need every delegation to listen carefully. The room was so quiet that Cale Voreth could hear the ventilation system. The story that unfolded over the next 4 hours was not, in itself, a simple one. Meridian Station was a deep field research outpost staffed by a rotating crew of 12, split evenly between human and Kreen researchers. It was positioned in a region of space that the Union's cartographers had labeled as surveyed, but unoccupied, a designation that turned out to be significantly incorrect. The survey mission had been standard. 3 human researchers and 1 Kreen scientist, Vel Makoran, in a long-range shuttle, documenting stellar formations in a sector that hadn't been visited in roughly 60 years. The mission was scheduled for 22 days. On day 9, they had encountered something that their instruments initially classified as a debris field dot. It was not a debris. Field.v E.O. Makoran's mission report, reproduced in full for the Council, was one of the most carefully written documents Cale Voreth had ever read. The Kreen were precise communicators under normal circumstances. But Vel Makoran had written with the specific, deliberate precision of someone who understood that their account was going to be scrutinized, and who wanted to leave no room for misinterpretation. What they had found was a dormant installation, massive, approximately 40 kilometers across its longest axis, and built in a configuration that matched no known species in the Union's archives. The power signature was negligible. The structure showed extensive damage consistent with very old, very significant conflict. It had been dark for a long time. That was the routine part. The less routine part was that it was not entirely dormant. When the shuttle came within 3 kilometers of the structure, something inside it activated. Not aggressively. Vel Makoran was careful to note this. The activation was slow, incremental, like something very old waking up from a very long sleep. The shuttle's communication systems began receiving a signal, not a standard communication band, something older, using a modulation pattern that the shuttle's I had spent 6 hours trying to decode before producing a partial translation. The signal was a warning. Vel Makoran had translated it, consulted with the human researchers, and then, because the situation exceeded their mission parameters, begun the process of contacting Meridian Station for guidance. The response time was approximately 9 hours each way. They had settled in to wait. This was where Vel Makoran's report became, in Cale Voreth's opinion, extraordinary. The 9 hours of waiting had not been silent. The signal from the installation had continued, cycling through what appeared to be multiple bands, as though searching for a frequency that would produce a response. And at some point during that wait, the human researcher named Dr. Cass Ellery, a geologist with no xenolinguistics training and no obvious reason for doing what she did, had looked at the cycling signal patterns on her screen, looked at her 2 colleagues, and laughed, not nervously, genuinely, with the specific quality of someone who had just understood a joke. "It's asking if anyone's home," she had said. "It's been asking for 60 years, and it thinks it's still alone." And then she had reached over to the communication panel and transmitted a response. Not in any standard Union language. In mathematics, basic, elegant mathematics, the kind that any civilization capable of building something 40 kilometers wide would understand as a greeting. The installation had gone fully active within 4 minutes. The council chamber was very still as Tevan Mall finished reading Vel Makoran's account. Cale Voreth was thinking, rapidly and carefully, about several things at once. He was thinking about the fact that a human researcher with no diplomatic training had made unilateral first contact with an unknown installation using her own judgment. He was thinking about the fact that her judgment had been correct. He was thinking about the fact that she had laughed first, had found something funny in the situation, had let that emotional response inform her interpretation of the signal, and had acted on it. He was also thinking about Velma-Koran's note at the end of the section. I did not laugh. I did not understand why Dr. Ellery laughed. I have been thinking about this for 11 months, and I still do not understand. But I believe the laughter was part of it. I believe she heard something in the signal that I did not, because she processed it through whatever mechanism produces that response. I believe she recognized loneliness. The installation had turned out to be a relay beacon, left by a civilization that had been gone for approximately 12,000 years. The beacon had been designed to wake when it detected a sufficiently complex civilization and to transmit a record, a library, essentially of the species that had built it. A message in a bottle. A last gift from a dead people to whoever came after. The Kreen team at Meridian Station had spent the past 11 months carefully documenting the transmission. The human team had spent the first 3 days crying at various points, which Velma-Koran had noted with the careful neutrality of someone who found the behavior confusing but did not want to be insensitive. The civilization that had built the beacon had left a warning alongside their library. It concerned something in the deep outer sectors, something they had encountered and had not survived, something they had recorded in detail because they wanted whoever found the beacon to know what they were walking toward. That was what the council was actually meeting about, not the beacon, not the dead civilization, not even the nature of the threat in the outer sectors, which was alarming enough on its own. The council was meeting because Tevan Mal had read the full translated record, and in the dead civilization's detailed account of the thing in the outer dark, in their careful, meticulous documentation of everything they had tried, every strategy that had failed, every desperate last effort, there was a single observation that the civilization's lead researcher had made in her final entry. 4 days before the beacon went dark, the observation was about sound. The thing in the outer dark, she had written, was not afraid of silence. It had never encountered silence as a weapon, because every species it had consumed had gone quiet when it approached. That was what it knew. Silence meant submission. Silence meant the end was near. Silence was the universal signal that something had stopped fighting. It had never met anything that made noise when it was afraid. Teve Unmal looked out at the chamber, at 63 delegations representing 462 species, and said the things she had called this session to say. The threat in the outer sectors is moving inward. Our projections suggest it will reach settled space in approximately 40 years. Every engagement model we have run concludes with the same result. She paused. Every model that does not include a human component. The silence in the chamber was enormous. The humans laugh, Tevan Mal said quietly. We have spent 60 years being unsettled by it. We have spent 60 years trying to understand it. I am standing here today to tell you that the dead civilization in Sector 12 spent 12,000 years trying to build what humans. They told the humans everything. It took the council 3 days to reach that decision, and it was not a unanimous one. The Korathi delegation abstained. 3 smaller member species requested formal delays pending additional review. The Kreen intelligence analyst, to the surprise of almost everyone in the chamber, voted in favor, and when asked to explain, said only that concealment of this nature would be discovered eventually, and that humans responded worse to betrayal than to bad news. She had studied enough mission logs to be confident about this. The human diplomatic delegation received the full briefing on a Tuesday morning in a conference room on Orion 7. Tevan Mal delivered it herself. She had decided this mattered enough to do personally. Commander Yael Doran was present, along with the full human diplomatic staff. 3 senior military officers who had arrived on an emergency transport 2 days prior, and Dr. Thessaly Marin, who sat at the back of the room and watched the faces of her fellow humans with the particular attention of someone who had been expecting this conversation for a long time and was not entirely surprised to finally be having it. The briefing took 4 hours. At the end of it, the conference room was quiet in the way that rooms get when something large has just been placed inside them, and everyone is still figuring out its dimensions. Yae. Ul was the first to speak. She said, "How long have you known about the threat in the outer sectors?" 11 months, Tivenmal said. "And the Council's engagement models, the ones that say only a human component changes the outcome. What exactly does that mean? What does the model actually show?" Tivenmal had prepared for this question. She pulled up the projection, a 3-dimensional tactical model built by the Union's best military analysts, and let it run. It showed the thing in the outer dark, moving through simulated Union defenses like water through a net. Silent formations collapsed. Coordinated retreats failed. Every standard military doctrine dissolved on contact, because every standard military doctrine was built on the same assumption that the entity would encounter opposition that eventually went quiet, and it showed the variant model, the one that included human units. It was not that the humans won easily. The model didn't show that, and Yael respected Tivenmal for not pretending it did. The humans took devastating losses. The engagements were brutal and long and costly in ways that the projection represented with flat, statistical lines that couldn't fully carry the weight of what they meant. But the line didn't drop to 0. The human units kept producing anomalous results that broke the entity's predictive models. They did things that were not rational by any standard tactical framework. They improvised under conditions that should have produced cognitive shutdown. They made noise. Specifically, they made laughter in situations that the entity had learned. Over 12,000 years of consuming civilizations meant the end was imminent, and because they made that noise, because they kept functioning and fighting and producing the one signal, the entity had never in all its existence encountered before. It did not know what they were. It had no category for something that laughed at the edge of oblivion and kept coming. The weeks that followed the briefing were some of the strangest of Yael's career. She had expected tension. She had expected fear from herself, from her staff, from the human crews who were slowly being read into the situation as the circle of knowledge expanded in careful, controlled stages. She had expected grief, maybe, for the scale of what was coming. 40 years sounded like a long time until you started doing the math on what 40 years of preparation actually required. What she had not expected was the laughter. It showed up almost immediately. Not in the briefings, not in the official planning sessions, but in the corridors and the mess hall and the maintenance bays at 2 in the morning when the second shift was running diagnostics. And someone made a joke about how at least the paperwork would probably survive. It showed up in the communication logs she reviewed, human crews on stations across the outer territories getting read in, and their first responses, in almost every case, containing some version of the same thing. A joke, a laugh, then work. She had asked Marin about it after the second week, during one of what had become regular evening conversations in the human lounge. Marin had listened to her describe the pattern, and then had looked at her coffee with the expression of someone confirming something they had always believed. "That's the mechanism," Marin said. "That's exactly what Velshan Tui documented 20 years ago. You've all just been given information that should, by every biological model, produce sustained trauma response. Instead, you're making jokes about the paperwork. Is that healthy? Is it helping people function?" Yael considered. "Yes, then by definition it's healthy," Marin said. That's what health is in a situation like this. Not the absence of fear, functioning in the presence of it. She looked at Yael directly. That's what the council was afraid of. Not the sound itself. The fact that you don't go quiet. The fact that the worse it gets, the more you produce the signal that says, keep going, we're still here. It's not just a startle response, and it's not just a stress mechanism. It's a transmission. Every time a human laughs in a hard situation, they're broadcasting to everyone around them. The edge is survivable. We are still going. You are not alone in this. Yael was quiet for a moment. Then she said, and that's what scares them. That's what scares them, Marin agreed. Because they don't have it. Not one species in the Union laughs like you do. Not one of them produces that specific signal at that specific moment. They go quiet, they go inward, they endure, and they do it alone, even in groups. But humans, she paused, humans broadcast. Every time. Even when they don't mean to. Even when they don't know they're doing it. The first joint exercise between human units and the Unions combined. Military forces took place 8 months after the briefing dot. It was not a small exercise. 43 ships, 6 species, 3 weeks in the deep outer territories running scenarios that had been designed, specifically around what the projection models showed about the entity's tactics. The Korathi were there. So were the Kreen. So were 3 species that had never previously participated in joint operations with humans, and who had, according to the pre-exercise reports, significant reservations about doing so now. Greth Vassal was there, leading the Korathi tactical team. He had requested the assignment specifically. When asked why, he had told his commanding officer that he had been stationed with Commander Doran for 6 months and had learned something that he felt was operationally significant. The first time he had heard her laugh in a genuine crisis, not a training scenario, not a planning session, but a real, unscripted moment of things going wrong. He had still felt the involuntary threat response. His plates had gone up. His body had done exactly what it had always done, but this time something else had happened alongside it. Something he had not expected and could not fully explain. He had looked at her face, at the specific quality of the laughter, the way it sat alongside focus instead of replacing it, and he had understood, not intellectually, but somewhere older and deeper, that she was not afraid in the way he was afraid. And for the first time in the 6 months he had known her, he had thought, maybe whatever is coming will not find us quiet. He hadn't laughed himself. He didn't know how to make that sound the way she did, and he suspected it wasn't something you could simply learn. But he had something he hadn't had before the 6 months, and it was quieter than laughter and harder to name, and it made him a better officer. The exercise ran for 3 weeks. On the final day, running a scenario that was deliberately designed to exceed the parameters of what a successful outcome should look like, the joint unit improvised a solution that the simulation architects had not predicted. The human crew had laughed in the middle of it. Loud, sudden, irregular, the sound that still made the Korathi plates shift. The Kreen go momentarily still. The Vethali observer in the back of the bridge reached instinctively for her cum badge, but no one left. No one turned away. The Kreen analyst at the navigation console had her eyes on her screen, running numbers, and her hands were steady. Greth Vassal, standing at the tactical station, had listened to the sound roll through the bridge and had made a decision in the second after it faded. He had exhaled. And then, carefully and without any particular drama, he had gone back to work. It was not laughter. He was not human, and he was not going to pretend otherwise. But it was something. A signal, small and quiet in his own, that said, I hear you. I am still here. We continue. TEV Mall received the exercise report 4 days later. She read it twice, slowly. Then she sat back in her chair and looked out the window of her office at the cold scatter of stars in the outer dark. And she thought about a civilization 12,000 years dead that had spent its last days trying to build what a species on a small blue planet had developed without even trying dot and in the very private space of her own thoughts, in the silence that her species had always retreated into when things became difficult. She found something she had not expected to find, not laughter. She was Vethely. Her throat did not make that sound, but something adjacent to it, something that looked at the dark and said, "We know you now. We are not going into you.